Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to be showing one of my current Storm experiments. This is another Chandra Fire of Kaladesh deck, and this is a mono red Storm deck for EDH. If you're a fan of my channel, you know I like taking things like Storm and known mechanics in the game and making it basically as difficult as possible to function. For example, a few years ago we did Anti-Blue Storm, we've done Naya Storm, and we've done Hermit Druid and like Sigarda, for example. But this is just the current experiment. It's mono red and it's Storm and it's difficult. Now we are running Chandra Fire of Kaladesh here as our commander for a very specific reason, because of this first sentence right here where we can abuse her with a few cards. Let's go over what she is as a commander first, and then we'll focus on why we're using her. So for starters, she have a 3-mana 2/2. She's a human shaman, and she's one of these legendary flip transform planeswalkers. There's 5 total. When she is in play, and assuming she doesn't have summoning sickness, you can tap her to ping an opponent. Actually, it could be yourself if you need to, because apparently people who do give themselves hexproof. If this is the third amount of damage that this card has done in that turn when you activate that ability, she transforms into a planeswalker. Now you can read all these modes if you want. Transforming her is not the goal of the deck. The goal of this deck is to keep her as a human and use this ability right here that says when you cast a red spell, you untap her. So again, let's reiterate a couple things here. Transform, this is a unique rule if an opponent gains control of this creature and they meet the criteria to transform her. It will turn into a planeswalker, but it will come into play on my side since I own this card. Also, this ping ability is what causes the flip trigger to happen. So if you go to combat, for example, and you swing with her as a 2/2, you get 2 damage off, you cast some red spell, and she untaps, and you ping. The ping ability triggered for the 3rd damage, she will flip. If you do it backwards, although, if you do the ping ability, you ping for 1 damage, you cast a red spell, you go attack for 2. She's done 3 damage, but this is not triggered, so she will not flip. Now, for this deck specifically, if you're familiar with my old burn deck, you're going to see a familiar card here, and in a second one as well. The more less threatening card that we play with Chandra here is Paradise Mantle. When Chandra is equipped with Paradise Mantle, she becomes a mana dork, and essentially giving all of our red spells 1 red less mana requirement. For example, Lightning Bolt becomes free. Now, this is pretty good to combo off here because she does untap on any kind of red spell, not just instant or sorcery. The better thing, the reason we really want to see Chandra, is for dual casting. Now, again, we have to be in Magical Christmas Land and assume Chandra survives a turn and we can enchant her and she doesn't immediately die. But this enchantment gives her another a tap ability. And that ability is just pay 1 red mana, tap to copy a spell. For example, we cast a Lightning Bolt. There's an untap trigger on the stack for Chandra. We can then activate this ability and tap her to copy the Lightning Bolt. The Bolt copy resolves, the untap trigger resolves. Then we could either pay another red mana and have a tapped Chandra to have a 3rd Lightning Bolt, or we can just let this go on and have our Lightning Bolt resolve and have her available for another copy. Essentially, with this on Chandra, every red mana we have, for every spell we have, 1 red extra mana copies that spell. If we need to tap down Chandra, for example, we only need to copy 1 spell, we can spend 2 red mana to get 2 copies of that spell. We can also follow that up with some other junk spell just to untap her if we need to continue sequencing through. Yeah, dual casting is the thread of the deck. Let's set the deck aside, or her aside here. I do like this SDCC one, but this is very difficult to read. It is a preference because the artwork is fantastic, but people can't read the text real well. So I do tend to keep this one around so people can actually read what she does. Let's start with the creatures in the deck. Now, this is a Storm deck. We have a very high complement of spells in our deck, like instant sorceries. There are other mono-red Storm ideas. You can do things like Zada, the Hedron Grinder, and that's a different type of deck altogether. This is more of a spell slinger deck that tries to copy a bunch of spells and rituals and draw spells and go from there. So we have a lot of guys that really care about casting a lot of spells, like instant sorceries. Thermo Alchemist, while we're at him, he does also combo with the Paradise Mantle. He can become a mana dork instead of using his ping ability. And that's just helpful. But of course, he only untaps with instant sorceries. Electrostatic Field is the newbie. It's a nice defender on turn 2. Fieldbrand Archer is not exactly a good defender, but she can attack every now and then. And more damage is off Gutter Snipe. We do have an Imperial Recruiter to go fetch one of these nice little guys to help sequence through. More likely, although, he's going to get the Gutter Snipe or the Thermo Alchemist. We have a Magus of the Wheel. This is one of 4 Wheel of Fortune variants in the deck. We have a Perforos because one of our win conditions is Empty the Warrens. We don't have a lot of other creatures in the deck to take advantage of, but Empty is the primary storm goal for this deck. And finally, we have Runehorn Kelkite. This is a second of the 4 Wheel of Fortune variants. We have a massive complement of Faithless Looting, Frantic Search type spells, where we just keep drawing and discarding cards. He will end up in the graveyard, and this is an instant speed Wheel of Fortune. 6 mana is a lot, but the best way to take advantage of this is to do it at the end of an opponent's turn. That way you get the full complement and you don't have to waste a whole turn trying to draw up to 7 again. Let's go through the largest stack of cards in this deck, the instants and sorceries. Hopefully my camera will not hyper zoom here. So we have 3 storm spells in the deck. Haze of Rage is a very fun one. There's multiple ways in this deck to lower a red spell's mana cost, and that includes buyback. For example, if we had something like a Ruby Medallion that lowers a red spell's mana cost by 1, if we had 3 of those, or 3 effects, similar effects, this spell would cost 1 red mana, and that includes the buyback. And every time you cast it, of course, you're getting a +1 to your storm, and the stack gets ridiculous as well. Now, this is one option. The goal of the deck is to use Empty the Warrens as our win condition, but more often than not, we have enough reduction and out that we can make Haze of Rage pump Chandra to lethal combat damage, or even something as stupid as the Gutter Snipe or something can attack for massive allotments of damage. Now, we do want to get a bunch of goblins. That's why we have Perforos and a Impact Trimmers in the deck coming up. And last but not least, we have Volcanic Awakening. Now, this was something I ran in my Kolaghan, my Dragonlord Kolaghan Rakdos Storm deck. And the goal of this spell in that deck was to ritual this out really quick using all our fast mana on turn 1, 2, or 3, blow up all the opponent's lands, then land Kolaghan and attack for commander damage. This deck can't do that. We don't have a 6-power flying haster in the command zone. We although do have a commander that may eventually flip into this planeswalker, and if the opponents don't have creatures, they can't pressure her, and we can get that emblem. And the emblem itself would then be the win condition. If we are trying to use Volcanic Awakening, it's to dirtle around, hopefully get the board clear, and then blow out the opponent's lands, and then get the emblem on Chandra. Now, of course, this is good. The speed of this deck, I need to address that real quick. Most of my Storm decks on my channel, they have a victory win around turn 3 to 5 or something like that. We don't have Ad Nauseam, and we don't have consistent tutors in this deck, so the speed of this deck is greatly reduced. We do have the chance for some ridiculous starts, but more than likely we're going turn 6 to 10 or something like that for a ridiculous spell turn. Now, the next set here is our copy spells. The way this deck tries to accumulate a massive storm and advantage is to just try to copy the spells we can cast from our hand. Now, copying a spell puts a copy on the stack. That does not count as casting a spell. But bonus round here, for example, is just a ridiculous spell. By copying other spells, if we have something like bonus round on the stack, we get an advantage like of a ritual gaining us additional mana or drawing additional cards, that the copy is well worth its place. Now, this is the best one in the deck by far, and the best thing to do with this spell, for example, is to actually copy this spell. The best I've had thus far is about 4 copies of bonus round going on the stack, thanks to a bot back increasing vengeance, and of course something as simple as a Faithless Looting at that point, or a small ritual, is going to be absurd. The difficulty here when you start copying bonus rounds is you really do need to remember exactly how many copies of a spell you will get, and this also can backfire because opponents get the copy too. You could easily get blown out by like a cryptic command bouncing half of your permanents and the opponent drawing a bunch of cards. Now, Increasing Vengeance, we can buy this back from the graveyard. Unlike our Rakdos deck, we don't have Yawgmoth's Will. Yawgmoth's Will makes this flashback cost essentially the red, giving us the graveyard bonus. We still have to pay the full ante for this. That's not exactly the best. We do have a Reiterate. This is a copy spell with 3 mana to buy back. There's a lot of combos that work with Reiterate, and if you are in this deck, then in my personal opinion, these are fairly casual and uncompetitive combos because the mana requirement investment to jumpstart it. I'll describe that in a few seconds here, but this is good. It can actually give us essentially Infinite Storm if we do something specific. And finally, we have Fury Storm. This is a card I'm experimenting with this week. It is essentially a 4 mana reverberate at worst case, but my deck almost always tries to put Chandra in play on turn 2 or 3, given a chance, so this then becomes 2 reverberates. We do want to use this to try to set up for some kind of ramp spell, because this one can copy anyone's, not just our spell, so getting like a Kodama's Reach is actually probably the best thing we can do. Let's go on through the rituals in the deck. Let's go through the generic ones. There is more you could plug. You can put something in here like a Lotus Petal or the 1 mana from Cold Snap. But we have a 2 mana to 3, a 2 mana to 3, a 3 mana to 5, 5 mana to however many mana the opponent's lands are tapped. This is, again, this is what I would consider to be a casual combo. This can easily generate 10 plus mana. And you can very easily go infinite with Reiterate and Mana Geyser. The issue being the Jumpstart. This is 3 and 3 plus 5, essentially 11 mana to Jumpstart. You have to cast a spell, retain, cast this with buyback, and hope no one counters it. What happens is the copy resolves, you get a bunch of mana. You can then keep recasting this from your hand with buyback. You essentially create infinite red mana and Infinite Storm. You can do this with other rituals if you have some cost reduction effects out. For example, if we had something like a Ruby Medallion, this would cost 2 mana, this would cost 5 mana. We then have Infinite Storm. Not making mana, but more reduction effects make it better. Now, let's keep on going here. The last one I'm playing with is Brass's Bounty. This is a fun pseudo-ritual. It's not exactly something that we can dirtle with like the other ones, being that it's 7 mana to go with. But, again, we have to wait till later in the game to actually have sufficient lands. So while it's 7 mana, it may only give us 5 to work with. This is a little awkward. This is something that we have to work with when it comes to copying spells. Otherwise, it's just going to essentially give us mana to build up into our following turn. And let's go on through the rest of these here. Next, we're going on to all sorts of cantrip, you draw stuff. Overmaster is a pet card. It is not exactly a good card. This is just one of my personal favorite cards from when I played Storm, like Rakdos Storm back in the Torment era when things like Tendrils first came to be. But we have all sorts of draw and discards. We have 2 that are at random. We usually want to shoot these out as early as possible to try to disrupt our opponent's early game plans. Our main goal in the first few turns of the game is to put Chandra out and make landfalls until we can do something dumb. So really, we just want to hit our landfalls off of these if possible. But we have some other ones. Act on Impulse is a little bit ballsy in this deck. We have very few consistent good pieces. We can easily exile something we can't cast, and we may basically lose the game based on exactly that. So this is something you do want to hold up until later in the game. We have a lot of drawn discards. The good thing about these cards specifically, when you copy the spell that says as an additional cost, you don't have to pay additional cost by copying it or putting copies on the stack. You just get the effect. So, for example, if we were to have a bonus round going and we cast this, yes, we have to discard a land, but this would then be 1 red mana, discard a land, draw 4 cards. That is the broken aspect of the deck that we want to go for. Doesn't guarantee a win, but it helps us dig real fast. And we have all of these. Now, this one does not have additional costs. If you were to copy this, you do have to discard a bunch. But we do have additional costs to draw 2 and draw 2 and draw 3. And another one that draws 2, but gives us a little bit of mana to work with. Again, a fun thing to do if you can get multiple copies of this on the stack. Now we have some big, deep draws in the Wheel of Fortune and the Reforge the Soul. These are the last 2 draw 7s in the deck. There is a Memory Jar, a technical draw 7, but we can't quite sequence that with spells, and it's a little expensive to work with. Now we do have some other junk in here. I am currently playing with Hazard's Undying Fury. I personally hate this card. I think it's kind of junk. Skipping the untap isn't the reason I hate it. It's just that in EDH, you can't really guarantee that the top 4 cards of your deck are going to be good. So the goal is, with me playing this right now, is I want to see how many times I can copy this before I decide to remove it from the deck. If you're intentionally wanting to investigate Mono Red Storm in EDH, pass on this card. This is just kind of a gimmick. Now, the better card, of course, is Apex of Power. This is something you may not want to copy like manually from your hand. If you already got a bonus round going, that's great. But this only gives you the mana if you cast it from your hand. So if you copy this, you're essentially just giving yourself 7 extra cards. That may be good. but realistically, we really want the mana. So what we want to do is to try to pick this up from the graveyard if we have some kind of recursion. It's better to spend the mana on like picking up recursion spells to kind of cast this from our hand multiple times. Now we have another one of those accidental exile cards we may hit, like the Act on Mend Impulse. I used to advocate that you want to play this early if you need to make land drops. But again, this deck has some very delicate and specific cards we can't lose, so accidentally exiling those early may be bad. Now, the way this card works, if you're unfamiliar with it, it says until your next turn you have access to the cards. Thus, you could do this during your main phase and have that entire turn and your next turn for all of those cards, so you can get like 2 land drops and set everything up. That's smart, but it's a little dangerous because all those exile cards are face up and all your opponents get to see them and prepare for the next turn. Better is to do this at the end of an opponent's turn because it's an instant. Yeah, you may not be able to cast all those cards, but it's a much more spontaneous set of events. Your opponents are not prepared for what's coming. Revealing like 10 cards to your opponents that you may cast on your following turn is a little dangerous. Now we have all sorts of recursion. Recoup here, it only gets a sorcery. This typically goes to buy back a Wheel of Fortune. But we also have Shreds of Sanity. This can pick something up. Unfortunately, it exiles itself. This will typically pick up an instant and some kind of copy spell. For example, if we can get a ritual going, and then we can pick up bonus round. Like, the dream is literally like Rite of Flame, or not, the 3 to 5 mana ritual and bonus round. If we can pick both of those up off of this and cast them again, then that's going to be a real good game. Then we, of course, have the best card in the deck. This is kind of the critical card in the deck. We do run a single tutor in this deck. That is Gamble. Gamble always gets Past in Flames if it hasn't been like extracted, because we don't care if we discard Past in Flames. And realistically, without this card, this deck probably would not be as functional as it is. This gives us the ability to rebuy everything, especially copy spells if we can, cast them from the graveyard and stack things up correctly. You have to be mindful for sorcery speed antics when you try to stack things like that. This is essentially the best kind of rebuy that we have in the deck, and again, it is probably the most important card in the deck. Next to that, we have some more recursion and volcanic visions. Unfortunately, this does exile itself. This is the only creature interaction we have in the deck other than like flipping Chandra, which sometimes is necessary if you need to like ping off a Aether Storm Canonist or something. But this does pick up an instant sorcery. Unfortunately, for 7 mana, it doesn't seem to do a lot. If your goal is to pick up a Wheel of Fortune, at 7 mana do 3 damage, but it is a recursion that we have to play with. And we have a Mizzix Mastery. This is a very important card for Storm. If you were unfamiliar with the overload mechanic here, the important part is this: it says the word cast. So by casting every single spell in your graveyard, you are choosing, or you can choose the order of which they go on the stack, which is good, but you also add to your Storm count. For example, if one of the cards in your graveyard is a Storm card, you can put that on the bottom of the stack that's resolving from this, and it will see all the previous spells going up to it, thus tremendously increasing your Storm count. Now, this is a deck full of cantrips, like a Faithless Looting type of cards, and a bunch of rituals. So if we were to overload this spell with just a handful of cards in our graveyard, we most likely will dig into a win condition. And of course, this says you cast the spell. So if you have something like bonus round going on, again, bonus round does not care where the card is cast from. If this just says you cast an instant sorcery, you copy it, it gets ridiculous. Mizzix Mastery is a pseudo win condition, but you have to work for it. And of course, the last spell in the deck is Gamble. This almost always goes in to get Past in Flames. If Past in Flames has been dealt with, we may do some kind of backup shenanigans like getting the dragon, because if we discard the dragon by accident, who cares? Let's go on through the other colorful permanents before we hit artifacts. Now, as I said, the most important enchantment in the deck is dual casting. If we see dual casting, we want to put this on Chandra if we can protect her, if the opponents don't seem to have answers. This makes things in this deck just run much better. Being able to double and or triple specific spells, it is a threatening thing. Let's go on through the rest here. We have Impact Tremors. This is in addition to Perforos, making our Goblin tokens ping a little bit more. An alternative route you may want to consider here is attacking with those Goblin tokens. You can do something like Into the Web of War or Ogre Battle Driver. But that's more if your creatures are more reliant on combat. If we had a more aggressive commander, for example, something that liked to get in the red zone, that would be an idea. We have a Mana Flare. This is a bit of a ballsy card again. Things we are playing mono red with, we kind of have to deal with, or take chances, really. We want to hold on to this into our hand until the last possible moment, because giving the opponents double mana is very dangerous. We have, this is Songbird's Invocation. It is a Russian enchantment. Sorry about the language barrier there. What this says is when you cast a spell from your hand, you exile the top cards from your deck that match the mana cost, and you get one of those for free. It does cast the card, but this only triggers when you cast spells from your hand. But it does give us a little bit of extra digging, and it puts an extra cast trigger on the stack, which is very good. The last non-artifact permanent in the deck is Jaya Ballard. This is my one and favorite planeswalker for this deck. If this could be a commander, this would be the best commander for the deck. It's not even for the emblem. The plus and minus abilities are exactly what this deck wants to do. Discarding and filling the graveyard, adding mana for various spells and whatnot. Very good spell. Let's go on through the artifacts next. We have, there's the Paradise Mantle, as I said. The second reason we are running Chandra. If the tap shenanigans or the copy spells is not going to be appropriate for your meta, if your tables tend to have a bunch of creature spot removal spells, you may want to try a different commander for this. But turning even like a Thermo Alchemist into a repeatable mana dork is cute. And of course, if nothing's available, it is still a 0 mana +1 to your Storm. We have a lot of mana effects. One not quite a mana rock is Wayfarer's Bauble. This is just a nice turn 1 play, pseudo rampant growth. But then we have all the expected rocks in here we could. Almost. I think I'm missing about 2 that I kind of want. But we have a Mox Amber. I'm not a fan of this card. Other than Perfos and Jaya, we have Chandra. Perfos will not actually turn this on, right? So we almost always want Chandra out. So this is a turn 3+ ramp spell, if that. We have the Soul Ring, and the other one drops them in Mana Vault. We have the Grim Monolith, and the ones that can replace themselves to draw cards later in the game. If you know you're about to get your artifacts all blown out, sometimes you want to hold these 2 up. Well, you don't have to actually have this held up for sacking it. Another trick a lot of people seem to miss on this. Commander Sphere, you can tap this for mana, float the mana, and sack this for a card off the top of your deck. That way you still have floating mana and you're not down the mana effect. Hedron Archive replaces itself to 2 cards, which is always nice. And we have a Gilded Lotus. A Thrawn Dynamo may be another inclusion in this deck, but this deck is a little hungry for red mana symbols. The last mana rock in the deck is Pyromancer's Goggles. Now, I did try this as a Paradox Engine style of combo deck. Unfortunately, in mono red, you either do artifacts or you do spells. There's not enough consistency to do both artifacts and spells. Because all the recursion for artifacts is too many card slots, the recursion for spells, too many card slots. Now, if you are interested in Paradox Engine style spell decks, you may want to look at something more Izzet-like, because you'll have the blue to help recur and tutor up artifacts to play to actually work with something like this. But in this deck, this is essentially just a good mana rock. It's a little 5 mana, is really steep, but just doubling up a spell. And again, this works really well with spells like Wild Guess. The additional cost of discarding a card doesn't matter if you put a copy on the stack. If you use this to cast a Wild Guess, you're paying 2 mana, discarding a card to draw 4 cards. Pretty good. And of course, if you have some way of making this mana doubled, for example, if you had a mana reflection out, an enchantment that says a mana producer gives you a double mana, then you could splice the mana, use 2 of that mana for 2 different spells. We have some reduction effects in Ruby Medallion and Primal Amulet. The Amulet is a cute one. It is a little expensive again, but it transforms into these lands. And I know that you're not supposed to do this in competitive like F&M style formats. I don't like de-sleeving my cards, so I always keep a second copy available. It becomes a land that taps for any color, and if that mana is spent, just like the Pyromancer's Goggles, it essentially is used on a spell to copy this spell. Very good in this deck. We have an Aetherflux Reservoir. I'm actually not a very big fan of this deck, or this card. I think this would be called the noob cannon for Storm decks. And I do know that this is heavily used in a lot of competitive groups. But when I think of Storm, I think of complex puzzles and math and putting together something really interesting. Aetherflux Reservoir takes a lot of the thought process and complexity out of Storm decks. But we are playing a mono-red Storm deck. We're a little bit restricted on what we can actually do to perform well. So unfortunately, I think Aetherflux Reservoir is necessary for this deck. So if I can find better cards, I'll probably replace it. And realistically, the Aetherflux, this is not exactly the best of spells for this deck, because this doesn't pick up a cast trigger off of a copied spell. The point of this deck is to keep copying spells into our oblivion. So really, this may actually just gain us a couple life. And we don't have a way of actually paying life for advantage in this deck. We don't have a Necro or anything. So this may not be something that's actually good for this deck, but at this time it's kind of needed to give us another type of win condition. We have Mirari for an Old Favy. This is absolutely a casual card. Paying 3 mana to copy a spell is a lot to ask for. But again, it's a funsy card. And we have the Memory Jar for a draw 7. Of course, this is not an exact draw 7. We have them until end of turn. It does what our deck wants to do by filling the graveyard, although. So if anything, we can try to do the trick of waiting to the opponent's end step to activate this, and then just dirtle from there. Now we go on to the lands. The deck only has 35 lands. 3 of them are non-basic. Mirror Pool is another card I'm currently testing. It unfortunately does come into play tapped, and we don't have any wastes because this ability to copy a spell does require a specific type of mana. We have to rely on either untapped Myriad Landscape or an Ancient Tomb to get the mana to activate this, or a few mana rocks. Realistically, I'm going to replace this with just a better card. But we have the Myriad Landscape for a small amount of value and Ancient Tomb for some fast mana. And then, of course, we have 32 of the exact same mountains because I like this artwork. Let's stick these over here and go back to Chandra. Now, again, I know I make a lot of Chandra decks on my channel. A lot of them have been very bad, some thematic, some burned, some fun v1. This is more of a multiplayer Antic Storm deck. It is not very quick out the boat. Like, turn 6 is an ideal turn where we could try to do something relevant. It may not be winning the game, it may be preparing, but it seems to be a much more fair and fun deck. I actually enjoy this much more than tutoring for ad nauseum win the game.deck. Yeah. Now again, if you enjoy this style of deck, you may want to investigate some other commanders that may fit your preference better. If you like the idea of anti-blue or unusual storm decks, always hit me up. I love having fun conversations, developing and working on these nonsense. But any ideas or feedback, always welcome. Thanks.